Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and welcome. I'm Spencer Tennell, a landscape architect based in Atlanta and a member of the Olmsted Network Board of Directors. I cut my teeth on Olmsted advocacy well over 25 years ago when friends and neighbors got together to propose the construction of a highway through Olmsted's linear park in Atlanta's Druid Hills. We won, and that campaign gave birth to a friends group, the Olmsted Linear Park Alliance, or what we call OLBA. It has been my honor to serve OLBA in its multi-phase rehabilitation of this park at the core of Olmsted Senior's last residential suburb. The Olmsted Network exists to support friends groups and conservancies around the country in protecting and preserving great spaces. We know that understanding the history and vision behind these parks and places is critical. We regularly call on experts to help. Those who bring to the table a lifetime of reading, knowledge, and experience. We are honored to have one of those great experts today, Dr. Frank Kowsky. 2024 is Calvert Vaux's 200th birthday, and Frank just happens to be the world's greatest living expert on Vaux. Frank will kick off this morning by looking at down in the park, and will conclude in a time for a brief Q&A session. We'll tour down the park this afternoon. Join me in welcoming Dr. Frank Kowsky.
Good morning, everyone. I am the fuddy-duddy professor who's going to talk about the history of the park. So I'll begin. I'm going to read so I don't go wandering off into side issues here. I'll start yeah, maybe if they could tune that up. Let me just take off my hat, by the way, to Frederick Withers, who is signing this beautiful church. Newburgh, a charming town nestled on the banks of the Hudson River, 60 miles north of its mouth, bustled with a newfound purpose in 1887. 2 years had passed since the death of Charles Down, a gentleman of 82 summers, and a pillar of America's horticultural community. The townsfolk, ever mindful of their history, decided to pay tribute not just to Charles, but also to his illustrious brother, Andrew Jackson Downing, a landscape architect, who had died 35 years before and left an enduring mark on America's built environment. Charles, the elder brother by 13 years, had been a constant source of support for his more famous brother Andrew. He played a vital role in Andrew's early forays into the world of gardens and into the nursery business. But Charles, in his own right, rose to international prominence, especially for his unwavering dedication to the science of horticulture. He had studied and written about hundreds of varieties of apples, for which he had a special reverence. According to Rita Wincaller of Cider Chats, he cultivated in his orchard 1,800 sorts of apples, 1,000 types of pears, and many kinds of native grapes. This is his portrait here with a bevy of apples, and it was Charles Downing who answered the question of why apples turn red, among other things. I also like this portrait because we're all sort of familiar with Andrew's sort of image that I just showed before. But this man seems to me to be more like a person of the 18th century, tidy-minded, scientific, whereas his brother is a product of the Romantic era. He was born 13 years later. So I like to think of Charles as the Alexander Pope to Andrew's Lord Byron, and that kind of dashing image that I like to project. Okay. Charles' steadfast passion for pomology, pear cultivation, and viticulture had secured for him not only a cherished place in the hearts of his fellow citizens, but also a distinguished spot in the annals of horticulture across the globe. As a local newspaper obituary noted, Charles had dedicated his long life to the most peaceful and humanizing of all pursuits, the fruits of which have been a continuous blessing to his fellow countrymen, carrying his name and renown from his serene home by the Hudson to every corner of the world where love for the beautiful in nature finds a haven. Even Charles Darwin, with whom he enjoyed a correspondence, acknowledged Charles' expertise, lauding him as an excellent horticulturist in his famous book on the origin of species. Far from being a pedant, Charles made his knowledge accessible to a broad audience. Thousands of European and American correspondents of Mr. Downing over the past 50 years, observed a contemporary, would attest to Charles' monumental efforts in clarifying the tangled nomenclature of temperate zone foods. The prairie farmer affectionately reflected upon his passing that, like the sunshine or the air we breathe, the quiet work of Mr. Downing has been a blessing we have come to accept as part of the natural order since our childhood. Seems to have been quite a remarkable and kindly person. It was certainly fitting that the public officials of the city, where the renowned brothers, Andrew and Charles Downing, have lived and worked, should memorialize them in a public park. And this is not City Hall, but I just had to sneak this in. This is A.J. Davis Great Dutch Reformed Church that is one of the masterpieces of Gothic Greek Revival architecture in America and needs some care. The park that we were talking about for Downings, the park's design fell into capable hands. It couldn't have been entrusted to a more impressive group. Calvert, Vaux and Frederick Olmsted were the acknowledged masters of the rising profession of landscape architecture. Their historic partnership commenced at Central Park in New York in 1858 and lasted until 1872, when they went their separate ways. Their friendship and mutual admiration endured, and on several occasions they were drawn to work together again. In October 1886, they began planning the restoration of Olmsted to the left and Calvert Vaux to the right. In 1886, they began planning the restoration of the commercially ravaged natural scenery around Niagara Falls, laying out what was then called the Niagara Reservation, the nation's first state park. Said Olmsted was the most difficult problem in landscape architecture to do justice to. It is the furthest above shop work that the world has yet had, and he wanted Vaux to help him in this endeavor. The next year, the two men had linked up to revise their 1873 plan for the topographically challenging site of Morningside Park in Manhattan. And 2 years later, in 1889, in Newburgh, they would join forces for a final time. Here, the undertaking was not to retrieve lost beauty, nor to harmonize diverse features, but to eulogize with art and nature the individual who had introduced landscape into the national consciousness. Though Olmsted's name carried national weight, it was Vaux in his 60s at the time who possessed especially warm affection for Newburgh. I like this portrait of Vaux that was done by David Levine in the 1990s for the New York Review of Books. And I'm not going to go into a lot about Vaux as a person, but people said he was a little bit absent-minded, he was kind of a congenial person, he liked to have a good sense of humor, a little bit unlike Olmsted. And this little caricature seems to be a capture of what I think of the kind of person he was. It was here in Newburgh that the London native had embarked on his American journey, hand in hand with Andrew Jackson Downing. In 1850, Downing, who was riding a mounting current of national fame, had invited Vaux, a newly trained architect with a singular sensitivity to landscape, to leave England and to join him in a new business venture, a marriage of architecture and landscape architecture. Here in Newburgh, Vaux had enjoyed working with Downing in the office he had built attached to his home, which Downing had christened Highland Gardens. And this is the little office wing that was attached to the house, which you can just see a piece of there on the right. So it was home and office. Downing's very accomplished wife, Caroline, also eased the Englishman's adaptation to his new surroundings. Vaux had also been present for lively discussions on the progress of American democracy at Downing's home when the Swedish feminist Frederick came to visit. Echoing Downing and Bremer, Vaux asserted that it was the role of government in the new republic to encourage the arts. Such a bond of fellow feeling grew up between Calvert, Vaux and Andrew and Caroline that the Downings came to value him as a family member. Vaux had also laid the foundations for a personal life here in Newburgh. In 1853, he married a loving wife, Mary, at St. George Episcopal Church, and they began a family that grew to include 3 children. Tragically, 2 years after his arrival in Newburgh, Vaux had witnessed the wrecking of the appealing life at Highland Gardens. On July 28, 1852, he had been called to Yonkers to identify the body of his friend as it lay there on the beach after a senseless steamboat accident had resulted in 36-year-old Downing's sudden death. For several years after that, in an office on Water Street, Vaux and his sometimes partner, Frederick, another architect who had immigrated from London in 1851, carried on Downing's work of joining architecture to nature. They conjured up various town and country houses for old and new clients. Many of these dwellings Vaux featured in his 1857 book, Villas and Cottages, which he inscribed to Downing's widow, Caroline, and to the memory of her late husband. Newburgh figured prominently in its pages. Of the William Warren House, Vaux, this is from Villas and Cottages, Vaux, who was well read in the British literature and landscape, explained that the design was adapted to the location, not the location to the design. He would later proclaim that woods, fields, mountains, rivers would be more important than the houses that are built among them. A veranda equipped with a rooftop balcony spanned the back of the house, so the Warrens might make the most of the captivating panorama of river scenery. Likewise, the David Moore house, he wrote, featured from the drawing room windows that opened to a wide and spacious veranda, commanding an extensive view of the Hudson. Fortunately, for both of these Gothic revival gems still can be seen in Newburgh, and this is a beautiful photo by Jack Boucher from the Historic American Building Survey of what was the house for the Warrens. Unfortunately, the most significant Newburgh villa, Downing's Highland Gardens, no longer exists. There is a recent placed plaque at the site, but the house went down, I believe, in the 1920s or 30s. Not exactly sure. The Hudson's water and mountain landscape, a national treasure of scenic beauty that Downing and others compared to the Rhine, had become for Vaux a cherished companion. He had learned to appreciate its picturesque beauty, not only through his own perceptive eyes, but also through the eyes of Hudson River School painters, many of whom counted him as a friend. Jervis McEntee, the introspective master of autumnal moods, Worthington Whitridge, the creator of poetic woodland scenes, and Frederick Church, the great visionary, were also sympathetic clients of Vaux. And it takes little effort to imagine Vaux and Downing sitting together on a shady porch at Highland Gardens, looking out over the lawn at the view of the distant Hudson and commenting on its tranquil beauty. And this is a sketch, or it's a woodcut from a sketch by Vaux of the view from Downing's house overlooking the river. Olmsted's personal connection to Downing was more distant than that of his friend and colleague. Their first encounter, however, predated Vaux's arrival in the States by several years. In April 1846, Olmsted met Downing, whose 1841 book, The Treatise on the Theory and Practice of Landscape Gardening, adapted to North America, Olmsted had read with enthusiasm. Visiting the Albany office of publisher Luther Tucker, Olmsted found Downing there as well. Downing had come to discuss Tucker's proposal to have him edit a new monthly periodical, The Horticulturist and Journal of Rural Art and Rural Taste. A delightful coincidence led to a brief chat amongst the three men. A couple of years later, Olmsted visited Downing's home to purchase apple trees for the farm he was contemplating buying on Staten Island. In 1850, by coincidence, Olmsted and Downing were touring England at the same time. Their purposes and itineraries were, however, different, and their paths did not cross. Absorbed in examining London's public parks, Downing told the readers of The Horticulturist that the parkomania is upon me. He was very much interested in public parks in England and Europe. This led Downing to reflect, but the question may be asked, is New York really not rich enough, or is there absolutely not land enough in America to give our citizens public parks of more than 10 acres? For this reason, Downing was pleased to publish later in The Horticulturist Olmsted's favorable remarks on Birkenhead Park in Liverpool, a place that would significantly influence Olmsted's thinking about parks in his homeland. It is likely that Olmsted's observations also left an impression on Downing. In the midsummer of 1851, Olmsted again visited Highland Gardens, where he apparently met for the first time Downing's new partner, Calvert Vaux. The following February of 1852, the first volume of Olmsted's Walks and Talks of an American Farmer in England came out. Sadly, Downing would be dead before the second volume of Olmsted's book appeared in the fall of that year. However, Olmsted had time to add to the front matter a touching dedication, which read, "To the memory of Andrew Jackson Downing, whatever good, true, and pleasant thought this volume may contain is humbly and reverently inscribed." In later life, Olmsted may well have reflected how his own home and office, Fairstead and Brookline, replicated Downing's earlier arrangements at Highland Gardens in Newburgh. This is a photograph of Fairstead and Brookline. After Downing's death, Vaux carried the torch for Downing's legacy as the father of landscape architecture in the New World. Long before he would design a park in Downing's honor at Newburgh, Vaux commemorated him in the nation's capital. In 1856, Vaux succeeded in having a large Carrara marble urn of his design placed near the Smithsonian Institute to honor his friend and mentor. The Downing urn still stands in the Enoch House garden. Visitors who stop to read the inscription will learn, and these apparently are Vaux's words, "His mind was singularly just, penetrating and original. His manners were calm, reserved, and courteous. His personal memory belongs to the friends who loved him. His fame with the country which honors and laments him." One could believe that fate, the The little nudge from down and beyond the grave brought Olmsted and Vaux to work together. After New York City and acquired the land for Central Park in 1853, the new state-appointed commissioners had determined a plan by the engineer who had mapped the terrain. Upon seeing the scheme, Vaux rejected it as unworthy of Downing's vision. He and many others knew that had Downing lived, Downing, and probably Vaux, would have been chosen to lay out the new pleasure ground. They had already worked together on the extensive park joining the White House with the Capitol in Washington. Acquainted with the new commissioners, Vaux, now a resident of New York City, conspired behind the scenes to have the initial design set aside and a competition held to determine a new and better one. His efforts paid off, and in the fall of 1857, the commissioners announced a competition. And I think this was the first one, the first competition for a project of landscape architecture. At that point, Vaux asked Olmsted to join him in the preparation of an entry. Initially reluctant to collaborate, Olmsted eventually agreed to join Vaux in the daunting task which they pursued at Vaux's house. Believing the effort would be fruitless because of New York City politics already. Believing the effort would be fruitless because of New York City politics, Vaux's architect friend, Wrey Mould, refused the invitation to participate. He was the third great creator of Central Park. Nonetheless, as we know, their entry, to which they had given the name Greensward, carried the day. For sure, the phantom of Downing shadows its winding trails, bridle paths, carriage drives, spacious meadows, and picturesque bodies of water. So I think that the plan that eventually evolved had Downing's stamp of approval, you could say, from the other side. Downing's past also played a decisive role in the origins of the new park in Newburgh. Caroline Downing, the widow of Andrew Jackson Downing, was the driving force behind its creation. Now, this is not a portrait of Caroline Downing. I don't think there's any picture of her that exists. This is Sargent's portrait of Lady Smythe in England. But it just seemed to me like it's sort of, that this is the kind of woman Caroline would have been, right? And a little bit pushy. So, this is artistic license here. Okay. So, as the widow of Downing, over the years, she had been after following her husband's untimely death, she dedicated herself to preserving his legacy. She was aided in this endeavor by a number of prominent individuals, including George William Curtis, editor of Harper's Monthly magazine. Also, her brother-in-law, Charles Downing, meticulously revised and expanded editions of his brother's seminal work, The Fruit and Fruit Trees of America, a book that he had initially helped author. So you'll notice Charles Downing's name at the bottom there as a contributor for the revisions. Charles Downing also edited later editions of Downing's cottage residences. And at Caroline's request, Olmsted drafted a preface for the 1870 edition of cottage residences. And it didn't get published, but the scrawled draft is in the Library of Congress in the Olmsted papers. But Caroline's fondest ally, however, was John J. Monell, a civic-minded Newburgh attorney and a longtime friend of Downing's. Andrew had been away in Europe when John Monell dedicated the country's first publicly owned historic site, that is, a house and grounds on Liberty Street, where George Washington had spent a significant part of the Revolutionary War. It is impossible not to think that Downing himself had a hand in this patriotic undertaking that joined the romance of history to the romance of art that had already surrounded the Hudson River Valley. 8 years after Andrew's death, Caroline married John Monell. They went to live across the river in Fishkill in the high Victorian Gothic masterpiece designed by Withers. Sadly, John Monell died there in 1885, leaving Caroline a widow for a second time. According to Newburgh historian Michael Green, in 1887, when the city fathers proposed a recreational park for the growing city, they were caught unawares by the onslaught upon the 72-year-old double widow. Caroline petitioned the members of the city council to attach the Downing name to the park. It is possible that Vaux, her old friend from Highland Gardens days, suggested to Caroline that she conveyed to the governing body his and Olmsted's offer to design the new space free of charge if it were dedicated to Downing. This generous presentment from the great eminences of American landscape architecture may well have been the deciding factor, as the city council soon agreed. Now, the site of the city of Newburgh had chosen for Downing Park was a former farmstead of about 25 acres. It lay just a stone's throw from the 9-acre property that had once belonged to Samuel Downing, the brothers Andrew and Charles' father. He had established a nursery business there after coming to the area from Massachusetts. Following Samuel's death, the estate had been divided between the two brothers. Andrew lived in a fashionable Tudor-style villa that he called Highland Gardens. And it was in the Tudor style, because this was a mode of design that for him, as opposed to the very formal Greek revival, represented naturalness and informality. A New World appendage, however, was the porch, an outdoor feature that Downing promoted as essential to a proper house. The world came to know the fawn-colored and bowered dwelling as Highland Gardens. Charles passed an unobtrusive but productive existence at the adjacent address and then a little bit later, further out of town. The location of Downing Park, therefore, held a certain poetic resonance, a new chapter that was unfolding close to the roots of the old. The park's creation promised to be a delightful endeavor, a testament to the enduring legacy of two brothers who had woven beauty and nature and international distinction into the heritage of Newburgh. Consulting with Olmsted at Brookline, Vaux, who was the landscape architect of the Department of Public Parks in New York, must have found the atmosphere at Fairstead, returning his thoughts to his earlier days at Downing's home and office. But at the start of their collaboration, Vaux and Olmsted realized that the original plot of land set aside for Downing Park would not suffice for the vision they had for their design. To create a truly munificent space, they needed more room to breathe. Thankfully, the townsfolk recognized the correctness of their proposal and readily agreed. The city council ceded 10 additional acres, a space originally earmarked for a reservoir and situated just to the west of the original hilltop. So here's the plan that they come up with. So altogether it's about 35 acres. Following a general division of labor, Vaux seems to have focused his artistic eye on the eastern portion, the right-hand side of the slide here. Here he envisioned a graceful carriage drive and gently curving footpaths that would lead visitors to a hilltop, a knoll, to a summit, through the upper left corner, so a circular dot up there. He was practicing his dictum that a successful landscape design should subordinate the whole to a dominant element, that hill. In Central Park, which he observed had no natural feature that could serve this purpose, he had inserted the beautiful Bethesda Terrace, a spacious esplanade that overlooks the picturesque lake and Rainbow. Here in Newburgh, visitors were drawn to the spot where they could also admire an enticing view. This is a little postcard that shows the view from up there at the corner of the park. The breathtaking view from this vantage point mirrored the one from Andrew Jackson Downing's own Highland Gardens. Here's the panorama of Newburgh Bay, majestic highlands rising in the distance, and the bustling city unfolding down below. Here was the magisterial gaze of Hudson River School painters in real life. Frederick Church's Urbana and Jervis McEntee's Clovertop imbibed the same inspiring outlooks as would the site that Vaux had chosen in 1885 in Manhattan's Riverside Park for the tomb of Ulysses S. Grant. These were all belvederes of America's sanctified landscape, the generous title that the late historian of Newburgh, David Schuyler, assigned to the Hudson River Valley. Olmsted and Vaux would have agreed with David's formulation. Wherever possible, they sought to invoke the emotive power of natural scenery in the program of their public parks. Eventually, for this noble, memory-freighted Newburgh hilltop, Vaux's son Downing designed a handsome pavilion, a brick and stucco structure appropriately christened the observatory. Although Downing Vaux never knew his namesake, he would have learned from reading his writings and from his father's tutoring that buildings like this should bear withdrawing colors so as not to stand out from the surroundings. If your house is painted white, the landscape you will surely blight. Might have been the Vaux's motto. They were deaf as Downing was on white houses with green shutters. That was bad. Moreover, in its heyday, the building, as you can see in this slide, bolstered its assimilation to the natural environment by hosting a lush combination of vines and shrubs. Sadly, the observatory is no more, a victim of time and another highway just put through the park, a road put through the park. As many of the landscapes and buildings in Olmsted and Vaux's Park have gone sort of through that way as well, unfortunately. But the magnificent view of the setting of Downing's life is still there, and view down to the Hudson, to Newburgh Bay, and to the Highlands. Olmsted turned his attention to the lower or western area of the park. Under his expert touch, it blossomed into a tranquil haven, a spacious meadow dotted with trees and a large pond that later people christened Holly Pond. The compact composition artfully echoed the pattern of lake and meadowland that Olmsted and Vaux had perfected in their large urban parks. And as in the bigger so-called country parks, here one can encounter that sense of enlarged freedom that Olmsted spoke of as the true gift of the park landscape. One can't help but admire how Olmsted and Vaux, in their design for the park, seamlessly married the two landscape styles that Andrew Jackson Downing advocated for in his writings, the beautiful and the picturesque. The eastern section fulfilled the former, the western area evoked the latter. They had couched the memorial park in Andrew's own visual language. It was a fitting tribute, a testament not just to Downing, but also to the early theory and practice of American landscape architecture, which he inaugurated, always say Olmsted was the father of landscape architecture in America, but it was really Downing that started the whole movement. The park's construction, however, stretched over several years, with its grand opening finally taking place in 1897. Sadly, neither Vaux nor Olmsted could witness their creation in all its glory. Vaux had passed away in 1895, and Olmsted was battling mental illness and would soon become a patient at the McLean Hospital in Boston. It fell to John C. Olmsted on the right, and Olmsted's adopted son, along with Downing Vaux, who had been born in Newburgh in 1856, to complete the project their fathers had begun. This collaboration is perhaps the only instance where the sons of these two titans of American landscape architecture joined forces to complete the work begun by their fathers. These two men were also instrumental in completing another crusade, you might say, of Olmsted and Vaux, that is the professionalization of landscape architecture. And they were two of the founding members of the ASLA, and Vaux, Downing Vaux, was the secretary for a number of years. Today, Downing Park is maintained by the citizens of Newburgh, with the Downing Park Conservancy providing valuable advice in public advocacy, and the Garden Club of Orange and Dutchess counties lending a hand in its preservation. The park stands as a symbol of Newburgh's significant contribution to the world of landscape design and scientific horticulture. After all, it was the birthplace not of one, but of two remarkable figures, Andrew and Charles Downing, though Charles' name no longer graces the park. Although not as whole as Olmsted and Vaux once knew it, the park authenticates the radical appeal to the American people that Andrew Jackson Downing penned here in Newburgh a long time ago, which was, plant spacious parks in your cities and loose their gates as wide as the morning to the whole people. Thank you.
In order to take a picture of all the kids and then set them free for the rest of the afternoon. So we'll do a picture, and it'll take about 5 minutes, and then we'll start out with Sarah Zodi after that. So, Mr. Mayor, if you'd stay for the photo, and for Sarah, that'd be fantastic. And then we'll have an opportunity to ask Frank some questions a little bit later. Super.